So whether you're coming from traditional in political science, you have maybe you come from the left or from the right, whether you're coming from a liberal sense, progressive sense, or from a conservative sense, which says we need to keep the status quo as is, but just overall, different political parties are supposed to offer a frame by which we're supposed to see governance. So first will be at the top level, what's your idea of governance? What are the major policies you are championing that you bring forth? In this case, His Excellency the President was very clear. He has a big 5 governing agenda. He understands that he's a human capital development president. This is an idea, philosophy by which he governs. And this is also, as you know, was the basis of his coming to power. The second and very important part of the role of an opposition in a democracy as well is to hold us in governance to account. They should provide a set of checks and balances to government. So say, you've done this, provide a critical analysis of the work that we're doing and say, this is where you went right, this is where you went wrong, making sure that we are kept on our toes. This is important. Democracy does not thrive if you have just one way, all man they go the same way. Democracy requires, this is why when people say, we're divided, I say no. It is a good thing that we are not on the same side. I have very good friends on the opposition side. It is a good thing. Without that, you don't have a democracy. If we all be near one side, not a democracy it is. So you are required to provide. Again, without being disagreeable, you can disagree. The Honorable Agokabo said it very eloquently in Parliament when President Spio spoke and we did the press conference. He said, just because we're in opposition does not mean we are opposed to the country's development, and people conflate those two things. Another thing an opposition is supposed to do is to present and offer diverse voices in the governance process. The opposition is supposed to work with the diversity of views and voices to make sure that the governance process reflects all these voices across governance. And then and the other thing, final thing I would say is the opposition is also supposed to offer not just a critique, but an alternative vision. If na been we, na so, we for do know. That vision is also important in a governance and a democracy, because even as we govern, and we're saying human capital development, we're centering the ordinary person and all that, the opposition is supposed to keep reminding the populace that this alternative vision exists, and this is how that alternative should manifest. So those would be, I think, from a political science perspective, those would be the 4 big buckets of what an opposition is supposed to do.
Jasmed Suma is the chairman and leader of the National Grand Coalition, NGC party. The minister has spoken about what the opposition or opposition parties should be, their role in governance and democracy. Luckily, you had just walked in when he started making his submission. But also, as he painted that picture, there is a role of the ruling government, the party in power in the seat of presidency, for other opposition parties to be able to live up, perhaps, for lack of a better way to put it, to their functions in society. Has the ruling government been giving opposition parties that space to able to contribute towards governance and democracy as freely as they ought to?
Thank you for having me, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings to you, my friend minister. Opposition supposed to see themselves as government in waiting. It should be structured as government in waiting. As the minister rightly said, you can be critical but not necessarily opposed to or against development. So if the opposition sees itself as one that is government in waiting, then the opposition should be ready and prepared with its own set of policies that will serve as an alternative to what the government is offering. With regards to the sustenance of democratic activities, which is part of the role of opposition parties, it is the government responsibility, as constitutionally demanded, to ensure that democracy strive within the country, because without which we will resort to a dictatorship where nobody is having the right to criticize. Now, unfortunately here in Sierra Leone, we have two dominant political parties. As we all know, they're always at loggerheads, but they seem to agree on one thing: to stifle the political space and limit it only to those two political parties. As you have seen over the several months, when this issue about the tripartite was brought up and encouraged by the international community, our party was and still is in support of the actions of the tripartite committee. They were initially focused on peace between APC and SLPP, but their mandate was extended to review and make recommendations as regards to what changes needs to be done within our electoral systems to make sure that the democratic process is fair and balanced. Unfortunately, the rest of us were excluded. Initially, I should say, but I think still excluded, because in the sense that even though our party made several efforts, wrote letters, approached the Peace Commission, and contacted the international community, they eventually gave us an opening for us to put forward our own set of recommendations. Unfortunately, of all the 80 recommendations submitted by the tripartite committee, I could hardly see anything that we submitted as our own alternative. So that's just an example of why I think much is not being encouraged in terms of encouraging multi-party systems outside the two existing political parties. For instance, this so-called PR system, which is supposed to create an opportunity for smaller parties to have a say in governance, in Sierra Leone is used to stifle smaller parties into extinction. As reflected in the results of the 2023 elections, all other parties that had seats in parliament have disappeared. Their seats have disappeared because the threshold that is established, completely different from global standard.
Okay.
In places like Italy and Israel and other parts of the world that does the PR system, their threshold is less than 5%. Ours is 11.9%. And we're talking about struggling political parties competing against giants that have existed over 30, 40 or more years for resources to engage in electoral activities in the millions of dollars. They can afford $2, $3, $4, $5 million. We can hardly afford $1 million to compete with them. And then they put the threshold such a way that it's not attainable. So we are strongly opposed to the PR system as it is.
Gismed, those could be spices to spice up, the meal that we're about to prepare. But again, how constructive are opposition parties in Sierra Leone?
Well, the reality is they're not constructive. With the exception of the NGC party, we're trying now to restructure it to be constructive. And the reason being is because we have one-man show briefcase political parties existing in the country. And you will begin to wonder, how do they continue to exist? Because a political party is supposed to have a following, it's supposed to have numbers, it's supposed to have people that follow them. And if you have political parties that exist in briefcase, there must be a reason. It's because the two big giant political parties are using these smaller political parties.
Including the NGC?
Yeah, stuff lie. I say that because NGC is excluded. Blatantly. I'm pointing it out because I know what the problem is. I cannot see a problem and put myself into it. So these smaller parties are being used as a tool by APC and SLPP You have APA.
Including
the NGC.
No, NGC is not included in that.
But how do you say that when they just concluded elections of last year? The NGC had entered into an agreement with the ruling party, the SLPP. You came up with an agreement. You did not put forward a presidential candidate because you threw your support to the SLPP. So how conveniently do you exclude the NGC from being part of the problem?
Well, that's a very good point, but guess what? We went there in good faith. We relied and depend on the faith and trust we had in our former leader.
So the agreement you had is not the subject of the conversation. It's just to point out that the NGC itself is a part of the problem, as you earlier submitted about the other political parties.
Was part of the problem. I agree and concede to that. But the good thing with the NGC party is now led and held by independent-minded individuals,
okay,
who most of us have never been part of SLPP, nor have we been part of APC.
Okay.
That is the uniqueness of the NGC party as a rebirth to the new dispensation.
With those submissions, one would be in the haste to say the NGC is dead as we speak, if not buried.
What do you consider dead? Compare NGC with all other political parties with the exception of APC and SLPP. And if you say NGC is dead and there is no other political party other than APC and SLPP, is NGC dead? NGC with a political party that has executives in 133 constituencies, in 446 wards. We may have challenges in some of these executives because of the upheaval that went through. Some of them are lethargic, are not active, some of them have dropped off, but we still have existing structures. Okay. We still have an executive body. We're still functioning and doing stuff. We're still coming up with policy proposals. No other political party is doing that. Even APC is not doing that.
Well, we'll continue the conversation on the same. But nonetheless, let's see the need to usher in Reverend Jibrila Kagbo is all set in our studio too. Reverend Kagbo, it's a pleasure having us always. Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for hosting me.
He is the communications person for the National Commission for Democracy. Reverend Jibrila, we're talking of the role of opposition in democracy. Help us paint a picture, knowing well that you're coming from the National Commission for Democracy. Help us understand what's the role, what's the expectations of oppositions in a democracy.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. I will draw attention to Section 35 of the Constitution. There it is stipulated what political parties are expected to do. And when you say the opposition, we are still referring to political parties. And basically, if you look at Section 35, subsection 1, it says they are expected to shape the political will of the people. That is number one. Number two, they should disseminate information on political ideas and social and economic programs of a national character, and to sponsor candidates for presidential, parliamentary, or local government elections. So that is so basic for all the political parties, whether you are in governance or you are in opposition. These things are key. They are expected to shape our political will, and they are supposed to provide us with those basic information about political ideas, even in terms of economic programs. So we are expecting that even when you are in opposition, you should give us your agenda, because every political party that will contest an election is expected to have a manifesto. And for most of the time, it's that manifesto that is now translated into a development plan. So whether you are in governance or opposition, you are expected to give us a kind of national agenda as to how you would have done it if you were in charge. In other countries, they provide us with what you call shadow cabinet, to say, even when we're in opposition, this person is in charge of this portfolio. So when issues come up, that's the person they will talk to address those concerns. But for most of the time, it appears as if it's the party that is in charge is the only party that has a national agenda. But that's not supposed to be the case in terms of the ideal. And we look forward to seeing political parties playing their role even when they are in opposition to ensure that, especially checkmating those that are in governance. Because in the context of a multi-party democracy, you expect to see those in opposition putting the government of the day on their toes to deliver in terms of their promises and in the context of delivering what you call the dividends of democracy.
You spoke about credible alternatives. How does the absence of same significantly hamper democracy in a country?
Oh, definitely. If I am in charge and I don't have a tough contestant in terms of somebody that will remind me about the things that I said I'm going to do or what I'm supposed to do, it's like I'm having a field day and I'm going to do what I feel like doing. There is nobody there credible enough to question the authority of what I'm doing. But when you have a viable opposition, we can see that happening, and it's in the best interest of the people, because those that are in charge, they're always going to be on their toes to say, if we don't deliver, we have somebody else that will replace us without delay, and people are going to listen to them. There is nobody, even as an individual, who would want to be unpopular by way of what others are saying. They would always want to ensure that they stand up to it in terms of delivering their best when they know that there is somebody that is always after them to remind them about their responsibilities.
What we've seen with our opposition, it's quite insightful this morning that all of you have made submissions on what the opposition should be doing. But the as should be and what we see, it's two different pictures. What we've seen is the main opposition, APC, constantly at loggerheads with the ruling SLPP. The NGC from time to time had been doing even market updates on, cost of items in the market, sort of like putting government on its toes. But everything seems to come down to a point where they've turned the government into Akon, put the blame on me. It's just everyone else putting the blame on government, when we have so many other problems, from health to education to the economy. We're not seeing solutions proffered. Could it be because they're playing a petty politics of, if I bring you ideas, it's going to make you succeed, and the people would see no reason to replace your government in an election?
So you have just touched on something very significant there. I look at it in terms of what you might call love for country. It does not matter where you find yourself, whether you are in charge directly or you are in the opposition, you are expected to shape the political will of the people. That is a given. So to starve the nation of the best of ideas because you are in opposition, that does not augur well for development in any country. In the West, take Britain for instance, when the opposition is described, it's described in these words: Her Majesty's loyal opposition, to tell you that whatever they do, it's to work in the best interest of the people. So they provide alternatives, whether it's accepted or not. They're always there. If you now check the party that has gone into opposition after the recent election, if you ask them what their agenda is, even in terms of what the current government has, they will provide theirs as the alternative to tell you that at all times they are ready. Because like somebody just said about the opposition being a government in waiting. That should be a focus that guides you, that provides you with the motivation to say, at any given point in time, say for instance, the health sector, what is my position? It might even be the same with what the current government is doing, or a little bit different from that, but there is always an alternative. What is your position on education, the economy, etc., etc.? We need that kind of thing, and it's not about somebody taking your idea and then getting the glory at the end of the day, people pushing you to the corner to say that is your permanent position. If they know that you have the best of ideas and you are serving in the best interest of the people, people can always bring you on board. Now, the challenge again that we have as a nation is, in other countries, they experiment on coalition, so that even when you are in opposition, you can come with the best of the best of ideas to ensure you augment what is in existence to propel the nation forward. But we don't have that kind of situation. What do we have? The winner is taking everything. But other countries who are experimenting on the issue of bringing different shades of opinion to the table, they benefit from multiple ideas, and their nations are making progress. But when you are on the other side, it's almost like you are an enemy to the state, and the least you expect is let them blunder so that they can see me and bring me on board. But no, that should not be the approach. It should be that everybody, wherever you find yourself, our difference should be on the basis of ideology, not on the basis of, say, we want to see the nation backward because we are not in charge. So the opposition should change its focus, and it should be in the best interest of the people for us to work together even when we are on the other side. And it calls for a change of orientation so that our focus becomes developing Sierra Leone wherever we find ourselves. We opposed a one-party state, so that is not something that we can even entertain. So therefore, multiple views in terms of politics is the order of the day, and we must learn to live with that. Therefore, wherever we find ourselves, we must ensure we contribute to nation building.
Jasmed, it sounds like a very good strategy. As opposition members, set up the ruling government to fail, because when they fail, it significantly shrinks the possibility of a re-election, giving the people a reason to see them as non-functional or incompetent, ushering away for one of the opposition parties, as earlier said, is government in waiting.
Well, that is the politics of the old days, when NGC is here for the future. We don't practice that type of politics. Even though we still have elements of individuals who takes that line of view, because I don't know if you guys knew about our energy policy summary that we presented about a month or two ago. It was very, very, very widely accepted across the nation. Most people appreciated it, but I still had a few calls within my party that says, no, you're giving these guys too many ideas. But we keep telling them, NGC is not APC or SLPP. Please, let's forget about old politics. We have to be different, not only in terms of outlook, structure, vision, and the way we present ourselves, from the old ways for us to beat them. And I also challenge them that our policies, even if they knew about it before now, and even if they know any of our policies, they will not be able to implement them. Why? Because it requires sacrifice. And that sacrifice from the executive branch to implement the type of policies NGC is putting forward that benefits the people, they will not do it. They will double around it. If we can put it into test. Ask me about any of our policies, I will tell you right now, and they will not do it.
Would love to.
So we're not scared to put our policies across.
Would love to delve into your policies, and hopefully time would permit us to delve into that. But let's come back to the minister briefly. How much support would you say you've gotten from opposition parties, especially in areas of informing policies, in areas of recommendations to solve some of the country's problems? How much support have you had in that area as a ruling government?
Thank you for this conversation. I think it's very healthy for democracy, and I think one of the roles actually of an opposition party is to stimulate public debates and public conversations. One of the things that I think is missing in this equation, I think it's been pointed out by the two gentlemen, is that there is a there is a gaping hole on civics in our country, on the question of civic education, so that you understand that at the end of the day, the country comes first. So if the country is above everything, then the debates we're having, then the ideas we're proposing are about the advancement of the country. So if you understand that country is ahead of everything else, and I can assure you that that's what we're working on right now with the Ministry of Information and Civic Education, is to build a new national civics agenda that is clear, that is distinct, it has a set of values, and number one on those values is the love of our country, and that love is based on a decolonized reconstruction of our history, because it's very hard for you to be very proud of your country if the country's narrative, now every country has a narrative, most of it is fictional. America tells you they're the greatest nation on the earth, you know, the UK, you go to China, they have a national narrative that's ingrained in the people that says this is who we are, this is what we did, this is why we're here, this is how we came here. It's glaringly lacking in our body politic in our country. It means that sometimes there's a tension between who Mr. Jesmed is and who I am, and why we should be one country and one people. I know that's also the motto of my party, but I think the once we get that narrative, you know, we're talking to Professor Joe Edi Ali, for example, who says, if you think about the American War of Independence, you know, it's called the Tea Party. If it was reduced as, oh, there are the Minjos go jump no more for tea, then they will not have this sense of national pride. In Sierra Leone, history tells us that on the 27th of April in 1898 or so, we had a hot tax war. That was our war of independence. But it is presented to us as our people were so primitive that they were fighting to liberate their huts. Even the idea of naming it as hot is to keep us down, to not understand that there's something to be proud of. That a group of our people came together and said, no, the whole idea of taxation without representation is anathema to the very principle of democracy that you bring. They came and they colonized us. They changed. We had kings and queens. They said, no, we can't have kings and queens. You are now chiefs, because there can only be one king and one queen, and that's Queen Victoria. And yet we kept with it. And now we call our people tribal authorities and tribalists. Until and unless we're ready to reclaim that narrative and reconstruct this country and say, yes, we have a democracy. And as I said, it's a contestation of ideas. But I also wanted to say some things about what Mr. Suma said from my brother from NGC. Democracy is also a representation of the people. It's okay to say my views were not taken into consideration, but democracy in its crudest forms says the majority now they carry the vote. So he mentioned PR system. It was passed by a parliament that his party was in. That's democracy. You ask about where do we get ideas from? We get ideas through the democratic process from the opposition.
It is wonderful.
In terms of what we set the threshold, what the idea is, that is why you have a functional democratic system. Even going into parliament, as he says, the idea is, if you're a small party, and in this case, his party, as you pointed out, has a coalition, entered into an agreement, that is democracy, with the ruling party on the basis of an agreement of ideas. Now, you cannot also, in the middle of that process, say, oh, we'll not mix again, and therefore now the entire process is bad. His party sat in that parliament that approved the PR system that was used as the basis of our last general elections. Are we okay with the outcome of all of that? Even our party is not. That's why we're having conversations on the constitutional review process. That's why the tripartite process has included recommendations about lowering. That is a platform for us to continue. And democracy, the final thing I would say is, it's not a destination. It is a process. It is a process every day that is messy, that's, you know, you take one step forward and you take another backward. You know, Americans like to say that it is, you know, Obama says it's about the process of making our nation more perfect. It's, you know, it's not that it can be, it's not that it's perfect, but that it can be perfected. No matter how you view the democracy in Sierra Leone, and people can criticize all you like. I studied peace, I studied politics. The fact that 20 years ago we were killing each other, the fact that we did not have the democratic institutions that we had, the fact that we've had 4 democratic elections at which we've had 2 transitions, the fact that after our elections, we now have these platforms where we sit and talk with each other, the fact that we host a weekly press conference where the opposition comes and we have heated debate, it means our democracy is in motion and we'll continue to make it perfect. It's important for us to acknowledge that too as a patriotic cause, that we may be imperfect, but we have things going for us.
Minister Siba, you spoke about the PR system, which many Sierra will say was met with huge resistance from the opposition in Parliament then. But again, democracy has a number of pointers to say we are practicing a democracy that is A, B, C, D, and E. In the Constitution of Sierra Leone, Part 3 of it spoke about generally the rights, which of course, when you talk of the rights, you talk of democracy, they go side by side. But again, one thing that many people have questioned in country is the right to freedom of association and the rights for people to freely share opinions, also to speak. Where are we in terms of same, Mr. Minister?
We're one of the freest countries in Africa. We're one of the first countries in this operation. Not a single journalist is in jail for expressing their opinion in this country, and this was not the case. We used to have a country where, not so long ago, so many people had cases on their heads for the very purpose of simply having an opinion. Journalists were arrested here and thrown into jail. We have a president who's come to power who said, hey, by the way, every single president since 1996 promised to repeal the Public Order Act, every one of them. It was in Anis Nkrumah's manifesto. He didn't do it. President Bio did it. We've set up rights to access information. We're working on a data protection policy. When you look at every indices, are we perfect? We're not.
The only
people talk about freedom of assembly.
The stain on that submission is the SLBC staff in McKinney that just recently got her job questioned for allegedly sharing her opinion on social media.
I really
That's
love
a stain.
That. Can I respond to that?
Just respond, because there are follow-up questions to say.
The allegation is this lady went to a town hall that we hosted and that she shared something that was against SLBC's editorial policy. She was called and told, you can't come to work anymore. I put my hand up on that. We received a complaint, we investigated. Here's the fact. She does not have a contract with SLBC. She does not work there. She was a volunteer staff. She had been brought back on board to specifically do marketing work. SLBC has editorial policy. You cannot share, if you work at AYV, you work here now, you cannot share certain information using AYV with your own personal commentary on AYV on your personal page. That's just their policy. I'm not part of SLBC. I happen to be the minister that oversees. I engaged the board and said, if she has a job there, she should go back to work. Secondly, nobody should be threatened because of they express their opinion. Now, there's 2 separate things. Her social media has been inundated with threats. I can assure you, up to this morning, we're working to find the people that have threatened her. And I swear by the oath I took in this country, whoever we find, and we will find them, we will bring the full force of the laws of this country on those people that threatened her on their social media. The full force that is coming against those people. They don't know what they're expecting, and we'll make that process public. But at the same time, if you work at an institution, you must follow the principles of that institution. That's what democracy requires. Now, she was called back to come to work to continue her volunteer position. She didn't come back. She's gone on and contacted all kinds of international institutions claiming that she's been summarily dismissed. How can they dismiss you if you don't have a job? If you don't have a letter that says I work here with a contract, you're not dismissed. Yes, there was an issue after the way she acted, and I have personally intervened and said, look, we need you to come back so that you can have that conversation. You know what the demand is now? That we must give her a full-time job for her to come back. I'm sorry, you cannot blackmail us because you have an issue. That's not how democracy works. There has to be rules. There has to be principles. You know me, I will never condone anybody challenge. Look, the lady that spoke at the event has said publicly that she's going about her normal business. So I will go after the Huawei reports waiting and talk. We have shared the video. We shared the exact same video with exactly what happened at that town hall. because that's what democracy is. The whole point of a town hall is to have those kinds of conversations. We can disagree. I can say, look, what you did was inappropriate. It's fine, but we can disagree on that. But nobody should go after you personally because of it. But at the same time, what we will not do is just because you have a disagreement at your work, then you start demanding additional things. That's not how it works.
So I think I do ask a question about,
assembly
and all this.
Can I
quickly,
can I finish on that?
Before you touch on assembly, we've had cases of recent wherein colleagues who seem to be very critical of the system, of course, as you rightly said, the president took it upon himself to see the need to repeal the obnoxious law, 1965 Public Order Act, which the truth is not defense in the court of law. But again, we still have situations wherein colleague journalists who seem to be very critical of the system, they receive threats, on the social media and all the rest.
Yeah, but that's not. Look. If you go into my TikTok now, it's actually ordinary citizens that call me and say, look, people, they threaten you. This is the fact of it. You receive that all the time. I'm sure you do as well. He does. Mr. Super does all the time. That's the difference. We have a cybersecurity crime law now in this country. The people that do that should face the full brunt of the law. And that's the example we're going to set with the people that threaten this journalist lady. And I know they claim to be members of our party, and that's why I'm saying in a public forum that we're going to come after them with every force of the law of this country, because there's no place for that in our democracy. But that should also, we should separate that from the idea that the state is trying to stifle people. For people who want to demonstrate, there's been many, many incidents in this country too. Look, when a president takes the oath of office, the first thing he swears to is to provide security for citizens. That's the first thing. The president's most important job is to keep us all safe. When faceless protesters, faceless people say, oh, Los Donaus, they demonstrate and all, they don't engage the police to provide security to ensure that you and I still continue to enjoy our rights, because their rights to assembly is also on our rights to move around. They should go and ask the police or inform the police, and the police say, okay, you want to do this demonstration, you should use Route A so we can close Route B. I say, if you do that and you have legitimate means in this country, you can. The problem has been that you have, as you know, extremists in the West who sit down there and call for people. We say, who's the leader of the protest? Oh, there's no leader, and then they want to go out in the streets. I'm sorry, we cannot do that, because we've seen it before. They've killed ordinary police officers who left their homes and their families to go out to defend us and to keep us safe. It is our duty to keep them safe as well. And that's what the state has to do. It's as simple as that.
We have in the studio the Minister of Information and Civic Education. Am I right?
Correct.
And also Gismed, who is coming from the NGC and similar to the Carbo. Gismed, at some point in time you spoke of the recommendations in the tripartite report. 71 in that report talks about the need for political parties that don't make it, I would say don't make it in election, to be unregistered or deregistered as political parties in the country. Taking into account the PR system which you mentioned, what kind of picture does do sense to our democracy in the country? Because there is every possibility that many of these political parties that you call smaller parties, including the NGC, will soon phase away as a result of that recommendation just made.
Yes, but there is also rationale behind it, because you cannot call yourself a political party. You don't have evidence to show that you are representing the people. You understand? There's logical behind it.
Do we have those political parties?
Tons of them. That goes without saying. Over 90% of those in opposition do not have following behind them. That is a fact. But to say that if you do not secure any seat in an election, that's too high a threshold. That is too very high a threshold. We could bring, because you're talking about 11.9% of the vote for you to have one seat.
By the way, I agree with this, just so you know, on this idea of the threshold.
So it's too
come
high.
down, and I know it's been discussed, and I know there are different proposals that have been discussed that will come forward both in the constitutional review process if this becomes part of it, but also in other review conversations we're talking about. So I think this is a good idea.
So my recommendation will be, with the exception of the scores made by APs and SLPs in past elections, they should take an average of all the 5 elections we've held, the percentage of the threshold met by other political parties, and divide it by the number of elections that we had, and use that as an average. And if we do that, maybe we'll get like 1 or 2%. That is a starting point, because this is a process. After a while, we might increase the threshold. But if you start with 1 or 2% of the vote, and there are tons of political parties who do not get even 1% of the vote, so it's easy to eliminate them. You understand? But setting up 11.9% threshold is like shutting down democracy completely.
Just imagine, we would love to delve into Facebook post and read out some of the messages coming through, but we spoke about the role of oppositions. Let's put NGC on the spotlight here. One of the issues we still deal with that has been a concern is the economy. The exchange rate, the USD versus the Leones. What's the recommendation put forward by NGC? If the NGC was the ruling government, how would you have solved this problem?
The facts are that when it comes to economic issue, is not a fly-by-night solution. It takes a process. And that process requires a lot of sacrifice. When you talk about inflation, is the macroeconomic data. But what influences that data? There are several activities that takes place within the economy that leads to that. And part of that has to do with the other elements of the economy, which has to do with budget deficit. That means government spending too much, more than what they are generating out of the economy. Trade deficit. That means we're not exporting enough, we're importing too much, more than that we're exporting. And debt to GDP ratio. That means government is borrowing a lot from public debt that is suppressing the economy. And most importantly, the lack of management of our foreign reserve, proper management of our foreign reserve. So what will the NGC do to address those concerns? This government has started one element of it, which is investing in agriculture, which will reduce our import ratio. We are spending over $200 million a year to import rice. We are consuming over 600,000 metric tons a year. 400,000 metric tons of it is being imported. So investing in agriculture, I'm hoping that year 1, year 2, by 3 years from now, there will be a cushion that will reduce our import level in that, increase the production level, which will have a positive impact on our trade ratio. The issue about inflation has to do with too much money circulating in the economy. And part of the reason has to do with the fact that government is spending too much. So a government, an NGC government, will look at fraud, waste, and abuse. By our assessment, a very stringent fiscal management of the system will save us an average of 10% of our expenditure right now if we focus on fraud, waste, and abuse. What that will do, it will reduce the level of government going to the public to borrow. Treasury bills, government is borrowing money from you. Bonds, government is borrowing money from you. What does that do? It suffocates the banks. It drains the bank. If you say treasury bills is about 30 to 40% now, you'll go take your money from the bank and give it to the government, right? So the bank will not have enough cash to give out to people to invest. So those are some of the economic elements. And another important aspect, which I've written on, when this Ebola process came up, I wrote an article about how the government can take advantage of the challenge we are facing at that moment and be able to redefine a new kind of economic reform of our entire system. There are several economic activities that are taking place in the country that are not being captured by the GDP. They're not being captured because there is no way government is able to tax them so that some of the revenue goes to government as people make on those activities. I outline in my article what government needs to do to encourage those people to actually not only register but also be part of the banking system. But it all boils down to three things. I want you to listen to this. Three things. Fiscal responsibility is key. And that starts with budget deficit, we need to drop it down. Debt to GDP ratio, we need to bring it down. It's over 90% right now. According to last statistic I read, it's about 93%. Debt to GDP ratio. When people want to deal with our economy, those are the numbers they look at. The trade deficit, we need to bring it down. That means we need to export more and import less. The challenge I have with this Feed Sierra Leone program, it's a very laudable program. Every development economist will tell you, most agrarian economies that depend on agriculture, were only able to transition into industrialization after aggressively, strategically investing in agriculture, which we had failed to do for years. Now this has taken that task up. My challenge I have is the approach. Part of it still seems to be the old ways, the traditional. Government should not be in the business of running business. That is not the job of government. Government should be in the business of creating an enabling environment for the private sector to strive so that the tax base will be broadened, the tax ratio will drop, so a lot of more businesses will pay taxes instead of the tax burden on very few. The custom duty that people pay at cost at the Port Authority, the high cost of bringing goods into this country is grossly reflecting on the prices that we see on the ground. What NGC will do, will waive taxes for all capital goods. If you bring machine to do agriculture, we'll waive your taxes. If you bring a bus to run transport, we'll waive your taxes. If you bring a truck, a trailer, those are capital goods, we'll waive your taxes. If you bring a machine that converts coconut into coconut oil, we'll waive your taxes because those are the goods we want. But if you bring your Mercedes-Benz, we'll triple your custom duty because it's a luxury good. Those are some of the economic policies that you need to factor in. Another important one that most government economists have failed to look at is controlling the flow of money in the economy. Now, the focus on the traditional monetary policies of the central government. Much of those policies are not applicable in our economy because some of those policies are not suitable for an economy that do not have a viable and active credit market. If I want to buy a house in Sierra Leone, I will either have to cough up the money or I don't buy the house. In most other economies, if you're working in AYV, there is a room for you to go to a bank or go somewhere and get certain amount of money to buy a house and you pay little by little. That doesn't mean you're rich. But because of the credit facilities that are available, you're able to access that. Those are the issues that affect and influences the way the economy operates. So when you talk about factors that influence the interest rate is only relevant if it can be used into the economic activities of the country. So my approach or my recommendation will be, which will be part of the economic policy team we're trying to put up in the NGC, will be focusing on, is to see how we can be able to target our monetary policies such that it goes to specific sectors of the economy that we actually want to revamp. So that if you make a generalized monetary policies, those people that are importing goods and services which has an adverse effect on the economy are the ones that are going to gain. Because if you want to establish a factory and the interest rate is 20 to 30%, a factory, you invest in it, it takes 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you begin to get return on investment. You will not take that loan. But somebody importing bags of tomatoes and onions or whatever, clothes and shoes, they can buy it in a few months, they turn it over and pay back to the bank. So those are the activities that hurt the economy, and the ones that are supposed to be established in factories, they don't take the loans because of the high interest rate. So monetary policy should be targeting those sectors and find a way to tailor, influence the policies, the interest rate, so that those people who want to come open factories are given a greater enabling environment so that they're able to build the private sector.
Gismet, one will say those are brilliant submissions, even though they might have some downsides. But again, at some point in time, the NGC used to hold press conferences to inform the public as to their position in terms of current happenings, livelihoods and what have you. But that seems dormant as we speak. What's the problem? Because we've seen the main opposition, APC.
Yeah, that's true.
Taking a cue from same. What's the problem?
We're still managing crisis. We went into the election in crisis when factions of our members disagreed with the position of the party. We came out of it losing. So those who exited...
Was the party in coma?
No, the party is not in coma. We're very active. But before you go out, you have to build the internal structures for what we're working on. Sure. So those press conferences will be coming back to it. We want to even... That's part of the reason why I'm even... I came to AYV the other day for us to negotiate about the NGC hours, let's revive that. But everything costs money. And you guys know, if you call a press conference right now, those journalists that come, they're expecting something at least for transport or something and stuff like that. All of those cost money. So running a political party requires money. And unfortunately, we have never been in government before, so we do not have connections with businesses to depend on to donate to us. It's only people like us, poor people, members of party, committed to the future of this nation, that are taking out of their pockets to finance the party.
You now have many of your members in the ruling government.
In what sense?
Jesmet, would love to utilize as well some of the few minutes left to factor in some of the messages from our Facebook viewers.
Yes.
Hassan Sulaiman Coma says, good morning, AYV. Mr. Minister, people of Shinge are suffering due to poor road network. Please, Mr. Minister, we want you to call our Honorable Veronica Kadisise to your weekly press conference to ask her about her people and about the development of Shinge, Kagbo, Chiefdom, Moyamba district.
Mohamed Jallo says, Suma, how can you triple taxes on luxury cars so people can't drive good cars? Is that how taxes run in the West?
Osman Prince Sulaiman Kavoni says, opposition is there to conduct checks and balances, making sure that the administration lives up to its manifesto and abides to the supreme laws of the land, the Constitution, and make sure that policies are geared towards the well-being of people rather than their parties.
Mosdi says it's going to be even harder for the smaller parties when the new recommendations, or I might say restrictions, which implies that if these smaller parties fail to win a seat in parliament after 2 elections, they should be deregistered.
Mystic Dwazak says the threshold is a major reason why smaller political parties will not survive the PR system in Sierra Leone. Secondly, many Sierra Leoneans have lost confidence in the smaller political parties based on how the other ones have messed up.
Usman Prince Suleiman Kavoni says in a democratic setting, citizens should and must be given permits to peacefully demonstrate without infringing on other citizens' rights. And if there is a probable cause beyond all reasonable doubts that the event will create or put the states in riots and pandemonium, that event will robustly monitored by the police or disallowed for the safety of others and the country as a whole.
Usman Kavoni says opposition parties are to work with the administration on national issues that could better the lives of the people. For instance, agricultural projects, education, healthcare, and other policies. I
think Usman Prince Suleiman Kavoni also mentioned in In 1991 Constitution, freedom of movement, assembly, expression, and the press. Of course, I think it was just making reference to what you were saying.
Swissman says politics is not for poor people. Most of you politicians are very poor, and you always fight to succeed in power to get rich. As a result of that, the country will always become underdeveloped, and the people that will always continue to suffer in the hands of the poor politician who comes into power to make themselves rich and super rich. When you think about the Western political policy, there is no poor person. Either Britain and France, and because their politicians are rich, that's why corruption is not that much. But in Sierra Leone, all of our politicians are extremely poor, and they have no political idea. All they know is how to loot the country and take the money to the rich people. That the white men, that is unfair. Some of you should forget about politics and focus in business. Some of you should begin to import rice, medicine, and spare parts, so people from food suffering, instead of crying for politics at all times, politics is not the only way out to make someone become successful. Think about it.
A lengthy one here from Mosdi says, I believe for third force to actually succeed in Sierra Leone, firstly, we must have a strong leader with fortitude, integrity, discipline, focus, and we, as the people, rather than me, myself, and I approach. Secondly, in cooperation with the first, the person is willing, ready, able, and capable to engage the people in an honest conversation with the aims of changing the mindsets of the people by letting them know that there is another way, a better way to advance the development of the country and its people. I also want to believe that this is achievable and possible, as the evidence are crystal clear. After 63 years and counting of so-called independence, I deliberately put a question mark on independence, which is questionable.
Eddie Grant says the winner-takes-all syndrome is what's hindering the opposition from functioning well in our beloved country.
Kamara Charles says the PR system was not the problem for other parties, but the threshold that was set up.
My last pick for now is from Uncle Sule. He says, what if you have a government that doesn't listen to its opposition, and anything that happens, instead of waiting for investigation, the government will accuse its opposition to gain political goal? So I think everyone should be engaged.
It's time we allow our guests to respond. Who takes first? Siba.
Well, I think I want to thank the citizens for their contributions. I think what we've also had from the opposition and my brother from National Commission for Democracy is what I just reiterate the point I made, which is that our democracy might be imperfect, but we can perfect it. We have the basic ingredients. And I love that citizens are saying, look, you have a right to peaceful assembly, but that right should not also impede our rights as well to be safe, for us to have a freedom of movement. All of those rights have to be seen as intertwined. I think on the question of what's the responsibility of an opposition party is specifically, and how the current functionality of opposition parties, I've already said I think the threshold is too high indeed for the PR. That's my personal opinion, and I know that this is a conversation that's happening as well within government, and I know this is a government that's willing to listen to these kinds of conversations and hold these debates. As I said, it was a product of a very specific time, the last elections, and a product of a democratic process. So we are now going to go back and review that and see how we, also the other thing to keep in mind is that the PR system also has a lot of other positive outcomes. It was because of the PR system that we have a much more integrated parliament in terms of representation, in terms of having more women in parliament and all of that. So while it has some challenges, it has brought on as well some really tangible benefits. So it's important to frame our debate as well with those facts. So I think there's a lot we can do together to continue to open the space, to ensure that the opposition does their job, to ensure that we as government not just have the opposition on platforms where we talk, but we also listen to when they have good ideas. Mr. Suma just presented some ideas here. I don't agree with all of them, but they're definitely really good ideas there. And that's what I think a democratic governance ought to be.
We were still on the conversation on the role of opposition in governance and democracy. The Minister of Information and Civic Education luckily had responded to some of your messages we read earlier, so he left to attend to some meetings. We have Reverend Kagu with us and Jesmed. Your response to those messages. I remember that there was a particular message you took interest in.
There was this message about politics is for the rich. And if you're not rich, you should not go into it. Because it's all about people going into it to go enrich themselves. That is the false perception that we have about politics, and that is why we are at the state of where we are today. Barack Obama was not rich, and he's still not rich compared to other people in America, but he became the president of the United States of America. The current president that is running as the head of the Democratic Party is not rich, but they're still running. But it's because of they have a system wherein if you put forward yourself with the right vision, you have the voters are the ones that gives you money to go represent them. Here, you will be putting up yourself with the right vision. They will happy for you. They will know what you're saying is true, but they still want you to pay them. So it's the way around. So this is the message I have for every Sierra Leonean. If the bread that we buy at the market, the price is influenced by politicians, the roads that we drive on, whether it had potholes or not, they're decisions made by politicians. The quality of the schools and the hospitals that we go to, whether they are places where they poison their brain, or the hospitals are death chambers, there are decisions made by politicians. If for 60-something years you've surrendered those decisions in the hands of politicians and they've never gotten it right, if you say you're not interested in politics because you're poor, then please, you are the biggest fool I can say. What you think will work. Because that's the only option we have. Because the other option that gives you nothing but failures.
Thank you, Jesmed. Yes, Reverend?
Yes. Let me say a big thank you to our viewers and listeners for their feedback. I'm particularly interested in the messages relating to the threshold for seats in terms of, say, gaining a particular seat in Parliament or Council. And earlier you referenced the fact that there is a recommendation from the tripartite agreement speaking to the fact that if you say successive elections, if you've not won any seats, you're going to be deregistered. Recently, the REF party has been moving around, making calls and raising concerns about that. Now, we must not forget that we have to follow due processes in terms of how to deregister political parties. That should not just be done anyhow. And let us don't forget, without playing the devil's advocate, RUF, for instance, was transformed into a political party on account of a peace agreement. We must not forget about that. We cannot just throw away an agreement because one day somebody said we're not interested in too many political parties. We can still look for ways and means to ensure we follow due process to deregister political parties. We might be familiar with the expression that the more the merrier, but I know that if you look at other countries where it has worked, they do not have too many political parties. But that does not mean we don't want them. But anyhow, if we still think we want to deregister them, let us follow due process. Mm-hmm. And somebody spoke about the fact that what if you have a government that is not listening? We have to strike the right balance. When you are in governance, remember that there was a day, say yesterday, when you were in opposition. if you get to that point again, you might want to get that situation where somebody will listen to you. So wherever you find yourself, let there be that symbiotic relationship where we both, whether in governance or opposition, we are in a dialogue or conversation to ensure that the best interest of this nation is served. Everybody has a role to play in terms of the progress of this nation. Wherever you find yourself at any given point in time, there is something that you can do. And your contribution cannot be regarded as not meaningful because of where you find yourself, let's say in opposition. Whatever the situation is, you can contribute to the well-being of Sierra Leone. And all of us, we have a duty towards this nation, and we must ensure that is done for the best interest of our country.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Jibrila Kagbo, and also Gismed, for your time in our studios this morning. It's been a pleasure. It's been an interesting conversation, I must confess. Thank you. Thank you.